Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to talk about kind of like the future of Hearthstone, what I experienced so far in the One Night in Karazhan expansion, and really the differences between the classes and how that affects the game as a whole moving forward. So, where are we at right now? At the time of making this video, we just had the first wing of One Night in Karazhan released, and I mistakenly thought the game would be at least a little bit different in some aspects. And in terms of arena, I've played about 3 arena runs so far, and I believe I have 1, maybe 2 new cards that I actually managed to draft. So basically that experience was exactly the same. Everyone else is playing exactly the same classes because there haven't been enough cards released. And the only main difference is that the occurrence bonus of Whispers of the Old Gods, the last expansion, has been, dealt with. It's gone. So there is a little bit of a shift from that, but not really anything too significant to take note of. The experience playing Arena today is exactly the same as it was last week. And in Constructed, I thought this would be at least a little bit different, and again, I was wrong. I thought it would be different because even though there haven't been that many cards released, we did get, although we only got first of the 4 wings, we got the prelog or whatever it's called, so we got more than a quarter of the cards, and every class has 1 card from the new expansion. We got a bunch of neutrals, and some of these cards are deck defining. The Huntress is actually a really, really powerful card potentially. So I thought people would at least be trying to make decks like these work, but my experience playing ladder has shown that this is not the case at all. The case is very simple. Everybody is playing a variety of a warrior deck or an aggressive deck, and a lot of people kind of misunderstand when I talk about that. So let's talk about, the different styles of play these days. So people call decks in several different categories. You have like aggro decks, you have zoo decks, you have mid-range decks, you have control decks, and you have combo decks, and you have like very marginal like other decks like fatigue, archetypes that don't really exist. So these archetypes have kind of changed their definition over time. I think if you take any aggro, any zoo, and even any mid-range, or any tempo deck of today, and compare it to decks like 2 years ago, you'd find that all of the decks 2 years ago would be basically considered aggro decks. The game has moved forward into a much more aggressive meta, and, classes keep on improving, even though we have now the limited standard format. Even in standard, it is completely dominated by aggressive decks. So the problem with that is when you get a new card and you want to try to make a new deck with it, your deck basically has to be either a warrior deck, an aggro deck, or a deck that is designed to deliberately counter usually a few specific aggro decks. Like you can make an anti-shaman deck that is pretty good against like Zoolock. You can make something like that with most classes, but that's it. That's what you're limited to because of the meta, and this doesn't really seem to be going anywhere. Now, I mentioned Warrior because Warrior is the very, very opposite end of that. It's very different with Warrior, and people have considered Warrior overpowered. It's the most powerful class in Whispers of the Old Gods, and they say that because as a warrior, you can actually play an aggro deck if you want. You can play a tempo deck. You can play a combo deck with, OTK charge minions. You can play kind of like a grinder deck with Grim Patrons. You can play a control deck. I've played fatigue decks, but I wouldn't recommend it anymore because there's just so many aggressive decks out there. But you literally had the full spectrum of every single deck archetype possible with Warrior, and because of that, people are pointing the finger, Warrior's doing this, Warrior's doing that, it's too good, all this and that. And I think it's really the exact opposite, and I want to forward that opinion so I give you guys a bit of insight. So I think Warrior is not actually the problem, I think it is the solution. So why is Warrior so powerful? Warrior is really powerful because it has early game board presence answers. So it has Fiery War Axe. Fiery War Axe is very good because it trades usually with a 2-drop and a 3-drop, a 1-drop or a 2-drop, or something in between there, and it's not a useless card in the late game, because in the late game you've usually somewhat stabilized, so attacking into a large minion doesn't really matter too much because you've armored up a lot through the use of your hero power over the later turns in the game. So it's just a great card all around. It's good in the early game, it's good in the late game, and it is game defining against an aggressive deck if you manage to draw it early. And you have a new card like the Ghoul. The Ghoul's pretty ridiculous, with aggressive decks getting more aggressive. The health of their minions are dropping, and they're basically at 1 right now. A vast majority of Zoo deck and aggro deck minions have 1 health or have some divine shield effect, and it just all these efficient board presence, efficient removals like Execute, and if you're playing control like Shield Slam, make it so it's flexible enough to use against aggro decks because they're tempo-oriented removals, and they're powerful enough to use against control matchups because they just remove almost anything. So, is this really overpowered? I would argue not. I would argue not, because there are decks that can just deliberately counter warrior decks. So if everybody was playing control warrior, then, you could just play like the slowest paladin or priest deck ever and you just win. You could just do that. You just win 100% of the time. You can't really beat these aggressive decks outside of warrior. You don't have the tools required. You don't have really any of what you need to have to consistently beat aggro decks. And this is where the problem is. If, as a new player, I see these brand new cards, I want to try them out, but I can't. Almost every deck I'm going to make is going to not do very well unless it is exactly built to counter a specific other deck in the meta. And it kind of makes it so, unless these other classes get vast changes, it's not really going to go anywhere. It seems like most of the changes that are happening, as time goes by, are pretty small to the classes. Warrior gets more efficient whirlwind effects, which makes it so it's better against aggro decks, and all the other classes are getting more efficient aggro minions, which are more susceptible to the warrior's cards. So what I want to see is, I want to see more classes like warrior. If you had more classes like warrior, you would have a much wider range of decks and cards that you could be playing. And I was also a bit disappointed because there was such a small shift. When you introduced I think 12, 13, or 14 cards in the first week of One Night in Karazhan, not too much really happened there, and that was a bit depressing. It made me realize that we're not really going to get any shift in the game until the standard cycle's out. So the first expansion of every year is going to drop 2 years old content blocks out of the standard format, and when that happens, because you're removing a lot of the critical cards from the powerful decks, that's when you're going to have change. But that kind of sucks. It basically means that we have more change when we remove cards from the meta than we do when we add cards to it. And I kind of thought, putting that out there, maybe we can see some change in that. So let me know what you think. I think it's a topic that's really interesting and really worth looking into, because at the end of the day, you want to have fun. If you see a cool card, you should be able to make a deck that's reasonably good against the decks that are currently being played, so you can enjoy yourself and fulfill your creative side of deck building, rather than playing someone else's deck hundreds of times to the point where you make no mistake and showing some results from that. So let me know what you think. Hope you guys enjoy my thoughts, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.